next one you sing will be my new favorite. Well, Brandon picked the topic this week without knowing he was going to pick the topic. You see, he was at my house for the board meeting. We do it on Zoom now, but anyone's welcome to meet in person if they'd like. And so he came by the house, and we have these angels on the wall by our front door. And he could feel the energy coming off of them. And he said, well, where did you get those angels? What's the deal with them? And I said, oh, they're Andy Lakey angels. And I told him this story. And he said, oh, well, you've got to talk about that some Sundays. So that's why we're talking about this today. Andy Lakey and his angels. I don't know how many of you remember back in the 80s when angels were becoming a big topic. But he was commissioned by the angels to paint 2,000 angels by the year 2000. Does anybody remember that? He was on Oprah and all kinds of shows. Well, the other part of the story we're going to talk about today is how I happened to manifest some of his little paintings. Usually his paintings are huge, but because I was told nobody could afford his paintings, and so you don't want to tell a Unity true student that something is impossible, right? Because that makes you all the more determined to get one. But I first saw Andy Lakey on Oprah, and he was telling the story, because he'd become quite famous by then, about his near-death experience and how he was saved by the angels and commissioned to paint 2,000 angels by the year 2000. And as you can see, his angels, especially with the flying angel there, they're very simple line drawings because he's not an artist. He was commissioned to do this, and he'd never painted before in his life. But he used to doodle as a young person, and so all he really knows how to do is doodle. And they're very simple line forms, but if you touch them, and everybody's allowed to touch them, you can feel the texture. And so people started to tell him, well, you need to have art shows for the blind. Can you imagine having an art show for the blind? And it was one of those you're allowed to touch art shows, especially young people just loved it, that they could come up and touch and feel the art. And people began to notice that something about the color and the tones and the designs, they gave off this healing energy, angelic energy. And children especially were touched by them because they ended up through celebrities being donated to different hospitals around California. And young kids would come in for surgery and they'd be really afraid and frightened. And there was this huge mural wall-size picture of his angels, and they could go up and touch them, and the angels would talk to the kids and tell them it's going to be okay, don't be afraid. Or one young boy had been through the California earthquake and was traumatized, couldn't even sleep alone anymore. And he went in with his brother who was having the surgery, and he touched him, and after that he could sleep alone at night. All kinds of stories about the angels giving love and comfort and saying it's really okay. You see, angels want us to know they're real, however you perceive them. And they're here to help us. And all we have to do is ask and allow them to help. Well, I heard that story on Oprah, and man, I was in. I had to see one. I wanted to buy one. I wanted to own one. And first thing I did was bought his book, which is up here if you want to look at it lately, that shows so many of his angels he painted. And so I bought the book and read it, and I was even more excited, and I started to call around to all the art galleries I knew. Do you have his paintings? I want to see one. I want to buy one if possible. And they all did the same thing. As soon as they heard me say his name, they started to laugh at me. And they said, well, nobody can afford his paintings. You can't, even us art galleries can't afford them anymore. And one after another, they all laughed at me. So I thought, well, okay, at least I want to see one. I may not be able to buy one, but I want to at least see one and touch one. Well, as I said before, they didn't know the power of what we know in Unity, the power of the mind, that if you have an idea and it's in alignment with your soul purpose, it's in alignment with the divine will of what you're here to do and accomplish, there's nothing that can stop you, and the synchronicity of the universe comes together to support you. So let's take a break and get back to his story, and then I'll tell you how I managed to manifest at least some little bitty ones. Andy Lakey spent a lifetime doing drugs. I mean, he was on cocaine, he freebased, he did it all, literally destroying himself. And in 1986, on New Year's Eve, he took the biggest overdose he'd ever taken, and he could feel it. He knew he was dying. And somehow he managed to get himself to the shower with cold water coming on him. He said he prayed for the first time since he was a child. He asked for forgiveness. He said, take me to heaven, because he didn't want to go to another place if there was another one. And he did the bargaining thing with God. You all know the bargaining thing. You do that when you get really desperate, you start to bargain. He said, God, I'll never do drugs again. And if you save me, I'll help mankind. I promise, you know. And usually nothing happens when people try to bargain. But all of a sudden he felt this energy around his feet. He didn't call them angels as much as energy forms. And they went up through his whole body, especially his heart, where he was taken to the higher dimensions of pure, unconditional love. Same thing everybody says when they go to the other side, pure, unconditional love. And he woke up in the emergency room. They were amazed that he lived through it. And there was no turning back for him. He never went back to drugs. He never went back to his former lifestyle. Never did drugs again. A short time later, another bolt of energy came to him, and that's when the angels commissioned him to paint 2,000 angels by the year 2000. Be careful what you affirm with God, because you never know what you're going to be told to do. Well, he laughed because he didn't know how to paint, but he agreed. And again, the angels want us to know they exist, they're here to help, and the world needs them now more than ever. Well, it took him at least 3 years just to change his life around. I mean, he had to leave behind all the friends that were involving him in drugs. He had to pay off about $40,000 or $50,000 worth of taxes. He quit his job to paint, didn't know how to paint, he only doodled. He had no formal training. But the angels and the synchronicity of the universe guided him. And I'm saying this not just to tell his story, but so you know too, when it's in alignment with your purpose, you are guided every step of the way. And the way he was guided was he'd get a hunch, like one day he felt like he had to go look at couches. Now, he didn't need a new couch. He didn't have any money to buy a new couch, but he just had the urge to go look at couches in a furniture store. And when he got there, he realized it wasn't the couches he needed to look at, but above one of them was a real unusual painting. And he wrote the artist's name down and called him later to find out, what kind of paint do you use? How do you do this? Another day he had the urge to walk into a restaurant. It was a high-end restaurant. He couldn't afford to eat there, but he walked in, and again there was a painting there. And this time he saw there was canvas on wood, which would mean that you could paint a heavier coat of paint on it. So bit by bit, all these things came together to teach him how to paint. And he bought a bunch of paint supplies. And one day he kept practicing and practicing, and he said it looked like mud and nothing was turning out. But one day he knocked over a can of paint. And in the process, another cup of paint got knocked over, and the two kind of mingled together, and he was too tired to clean it up, so he went to bed. The next morning he noticed the paint had dried in a certain way that it was almost like plastic. And when you come up to look at his paintings later, you will see they have a plastic feel to them. Well, his early work was kind of abstract. He called them celestial abstracts and space creatures. And not many people were interested. I can't imagine why. But one art dealer took notice, and they were so unusual and showed so much talent for somebody who had never painted before, that he's the one that said, you need to do art shows for the blind. And so he did that. He started to have art shows for the blind, and pretty soon he got more and more famous, and people were interviewing him, and he was on talk shows, and every show he had completely sold out. Everybody wanted his art now. And as you can see, they're very simple forms, line drawings, no faces, but a lot of healing energy. Meanwhile, he gave away 30% of his paintings. He believed in tithing 10%, but he didn't think 10% was enough after what happened to him. So he gave away 30% of his paintings. And movie stars helped him, celebrities helped him by taking his paintings and putting them in hospitals and places where people could really be helped by them. And again, they would speak to people. They would help heal people and give them peace. He completed his 2,000 angels. Each one of these are numbered. And he lived another 12 years after that. He died in 2012 from seizures. But his paintings are still bringing love and comfort to many people. Now back to my story. How did I end up with a few little bitty ones? Well, again, the unity principles. You never want to tell a unity true student they can't do something. Have an idea, hold it in mind, but then let it go. Don't struggle with it. Let it go and allow the universe, the synchronicity, to walk you through it. I had a series of amazing events that drew me to his artwork. The first thing that happened was, in Unity we have annual conferences, and ministers usually go to the annual conferences. And that year was in Portland, Oregon. I'd never, been to one in Portland, Oregon before. So we got off the plane, and you know how they have those tourist racks where they show you all the little leaflets where they show you everything going on in Portland. Well, we just walked by, wasn't even really looking, but somehow I glanced at the picture within a picture, and I saw that this gallery had an Andy Lakey painting. And I thought, oh my God, at break time we've got to go to this gallery. So it was a beautiful Victorian house. We got to the art gallery, and I met the owner and told him, I want to see the Andy Lakey painting you had. And the first thing he did was laugh at me. He laughed and he said, oh, we can't afford his artwork anymore. We were the first art gallery he showed his art at, but even we can't afford them anymore. But the longer we talked, and he could see how disappointed I was, he said, now wait a minute, I just remembered something. Come with me. So we start climbing staircase after staircase. And like a fool, I'm following him, And he, come with me. And so we went into this attic-like room, and there was a little door toward the floor, and he opened it, and he looked like Yoda, kind of throwing things out. And finally he brought out this box of odds and ends that he said Andy Lakey had left there when, he left his art gallery. And he said, well, you can buy any of these. They're not cheap, but they're certainly affordable. So I got my very first Andy Lakey, this tiny little pink one here. And if you want to come up later and you can put your hands on it and trace the angels, you can feel it as well as look at it. And I also got the sketch. This isn't a painting, of course, it's just a sketch, which I have in my office all the time to remind me that I don't have to do this alone, that there are angels always ready to help me. Years later, I lived in Sedona, Arizona, and there was a bookstore there, and they were friends with Andy Lakey, and he used to come there periodically, and he would do book signings, and he also would do sketches of your own angel if you came in. So of course I took my book, had him sign it, and it's hard to see where you are, but he did my own sketch of my angel, which was really fun. And I ended up buying his little flying angel, which is always on my wall flying. And so that's how I got the Andy Lakey paintings. Like I said, you don't ever want to tell a Unity True student that something is impossible. But his energy was so wonderful, meeting him and talking to him. And it's been said about him, and it's so true. He has a gentle and solid confidence, like so many people that have had near-death experiences have. It's that gentle confidence that everything's going to be okay, because I've been to the other side and back. And he really, showed that to people. But so again, angels are real. They're here to help. You just have to ask and wait for the synchronicity of the universe to support you. So now insert your own story. What is the divine urge that you have? What is yours to express? Simply believe in a higher power by whatever name you call that. Have the idea and then let it go and wait and watch for signs and the synchronicity of the universe to guide you so that you can manifest on earth as it is in the realm of divine ideas. Angels, if nothing else, are always here to give us that love and comfort that we so need in this crazy world down here on the third dimensional plane. Andy Lakey's wife had her own experience of angels, which I won't share today, but at the end of his book, she says, "I have felt the presence of my angels. They've never left me. I feel a real sense of security, and I'm not afraid of dying. I know the angels are there for us in life and in death." Wow. Let's take those words into our hearts for a moment and allow them to fill us with that assurance that we are not alone. That assurance of a higher dimension above this three-dimensional world. That assurance of divine light and love, however you experience them, as divine ideas, as fluffy whites, as forms of energy, as power animals, however they come to you, as other people sometimes. We are open and receptive to that higher guidance, that higher wisdom, those higher forms of light and love. And we are so blessed this morning to feel their energy in, through, and around us. And we do pray this in the very nature of the living Christ. And so it is, so it truly is. Amen.